When Albert Harris first moved to Sunridge Street, he thought it would be a fresh start. Albert was a quiet, respectful man who enjoyed his space, and he loved his old black sedan that had seen him through many years. It wasn't shiny or fancy, but it worked well, and he took care of it. Albert had just unpacked and parked his car near his new home, excited to finally settle in. But as he stepped out and locked the door, he noticed a woman staring at him from across the street. She had short, straight blonde hair and a sharp look in her eyes, like she wasn't too pleased to see him there. Her name was Trudy Lane, and she was known around the neighborhood for always getting into everyone's business. Trudy crossed the street toward Albert, her hands on her hips, her face wrinkled up in a frown. "Excuse me," she said loudly, causing a few people on their porches to look over. "This is private property, and I don't know who you think you are, parking that thing here." Albert looked around, confused. He had parked his car along the curb like everyone else. "Good afternoon," he replied, keeping his voice calm. "I'm pretty sure this is a public street, ma'am. My name is Albert, by the way. I just moved in over there," he said, pointing to his house. But Trudy wasn't interested in introductions. She scoffed and pointed at his car. "You can't just park your junk car here and expect us to be okay with it," she said sharply. Some neighbors were beginning to gather, watching from a distance, curious to see what was happening. Albert could see their eyes on him, but he stayed polite. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm just a neighbor, like anyone else," he said. Trudy stepped closer, now standing so close he could smell her overpowering perfume. "Well, maybe we don't want neighbors like you around here," she said. Albert felt the weight of Trudy's words. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. After all, he had only just arrived, and he didn't want to start things off on the wrong foot. But it was clear that Trudy had already made up her mind about him. A few neighbors murmured among themselves, and Albert heard one of them, an older man in a baseball cap, say, "Leave him alone, Trudy. He hasn't done anything wrong." But Trudy didn't back down. "Well, maybe if he's going to be parking that beat-up car here, he should be somewhere else entirely," she snapped, her voice louder now. Albert replied, "Look, ma'am, I've done nothing to disrespect you or this neighborhood. I just want to live in peace." Trudy's face turned red. "Peace," she shouted. "How can I have peace with people like you moving in?" The crowd around them gasped, and Albert felt his patience slipping. Before he could respond, Trudy did something no one expected. She reached out and shoved Albert in the chest. Albert stumbled back, shocked. He could hardly believe it. This wasn't just a case of harsh words anymore. She had actually put her hands on him. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," came a voice from the crowd. Several phones went up as neighbors began recording. Albert saw the red light on a camera flashing, catching every second of the interaction. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down," he said firmly. "I don't want this to get worse." But Trudy wasn't done. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger into his chest. "You don't belong here," she yelled. That was the last straw for Albert. He tried to keep his cool, but Trudy had pushed him too far. She had assumed that he'd stand there quietly and take it. But to her shock, Albert took a step forward and held his ground. And when Trudy went to push him again, he raised his arm defensively, brushing her hand away. The slight pushback was enough to send Trudy stumbling backward. Her eyes widened in shock as she tripped on her own feet, landing hard on the pavement. She gasped and fell silent, lying there in a daze. For a moment, no one moved. The whole neighborhood held its breath. Then, someone called out, "Is she okay?" As the minutes ticked by, the crowd grew. Someone quickly dialed 911, and within moments, the sound of sirens echoed down the street. An ambulance pulled up, and two paramedics jumped out, rushing to check on Trudy. Albert stood quietly to the side, feeling both anger and disbelief. He hadn't wanted any of this. He had just moved to Sunridge Street for a fresh start. But it seemed that fate had other plans. As Trudy was lifted onto a stretcher, her eyes briefly opened, and she caught sight of Albert. She glared at him, but was too weak to say anything as the paramedics carried her to the ambulance. Some neighbors approached Albert. "Don't worry about it," said Sarah, a kind older woman who lived a few houses down. "She's been picking fights around here for years." Someone was bound to stand up to her eventually. Albert nodded but said nothing. He knew that things weren't over yet. A week passed, and Albert heard that Trudy had been discharged from the hospital. She'd stayed there for several days, claiming she'd been badly hurt in the altercation. True to her nature, she decided to press charges against him. Albert's heart sank when he received the legal notice, but he was ready. He wasn't about to let her bully him out of his new life. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled with familiar faces from Sunridge Street. Many neighbors had come to support Albert, and several had brought videos they had taken on the day of the incident. Trudy was there, sitting on the witness stand, her expression smug as she told her side of the story. She painted herself as the victim, claiming that Albert had attacked her without reason. But when it was Albert's turn, his lawyer showed the videos. They clearly captured everything, from Trudy's aggressive words to the moment she shoved Albert first. It was undeniable. The judge reviewed the footage, and after a few minutes of deliberation, he looked up. "This court finds Mr. Harris's actions were in self-defense," he said firmly. "All charges are dismissed." Trudy's face fell. For the first time, she realized she had lost. The judge continued, "Ms. Lane, I would advise you to respect your neighbors and keep the peace. You can't go around provoking people and then blaming them for your actions." The courtroom erupted into quiet cheers, and Albert let out a sigh of relief. Justice had been served, and Trudy, for once, was forced to face the consequences of her actions. As he walked out, he was met with smiles and handshakes from his new neighbors. That day, Albert realized he was truly welcomed into Sunridge Street. He didn't have to fear anyone or feel out of place. And as for Trudy, she learned her lesson the hard way. You can't always get away with mistreating others. And this brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.